To you and welcome. And we've been waiting for you all day. You are the last session that we're going to see, and hopefully we left the best for last. My name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And I'm Steve Franzik, a retired professor of political science from the U.S. Naval Academy.
I'm Diana Owen, a political science professor from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, judges. My name is Meena Nishtala.
Hi, I'm Claire Mullings.
My name is Shreya Shah, and today we have our sponsor with us, Mrs. Willits. Again, thank you, judges, so much for your time, and we're very excited to present for you today. Thank you.
Great. And the star of this whole production is, of course, your teacher. Congratulations to your teacher. We're going to do question number 2, and I'm going to read it very quickly for you. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, quote, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist," close quote. Do you agree or disagree? Why? And what disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? You may begin.
Although Americans have found solidarity in war, the forces that drive us to conflict are not always patriotic or selfless. Just as President Washington advised against foreign entanglements in his farewell address, Dwight D. Eisenhower warned against affairs between private industries and the government, coining the term military-industrial complex.
We agree with Eisenhower's claim. The Senate and President must always be wary of private influences due to war profiteering. Fear-mongering rhetoric in the late 1800s, like accusing Queen Liliuokalani of, quote, sorcery, adultery, promiscuity, and treason, motivated the United States to intervene on behalf of the United Fruit Company and Dole in both Latin America and Hawaii. Recently, Honeywell, Raytheon, and Boeing have exacerbated Middle Eastern conflicts through weapon sales.
On the other hand, the United States feels morally obligated to police international relations, especially as the founder of the UN. Given the US's desire to uphold international democracy, the rapid spread of communism and the proliferation of nuclear weapons motivated the US military to interfere in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan during the Red Scare.
Furthermore, Eisenhower's wariness predates 9/11, a historical tragedy that altered American security and global relations. Following this terrorist attack, Congress wielded their ability to create cabinets, as alluded to in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, by passing the Homeland Security Act. Although the private sphere profits from Middle Eastern conflict, the United States originally used military force to ease public unrest by actively combating terrorism in the Middle East.
In the founding era, debates regarding a standing military diverged from Federalist and Anti-Federalist dichotomies. In Brutus 10 and Anti-Federalist 24 and 25, some framers were wary that a standing army would resemble Cromwellian England, a tyrannical government that used soldiers to subjugate their citizens. Federalists countered, motivated by the inability to quell Shays' rebellion, that maintaining a standing army would protect Americans from sudden threats and be more effective than state militias, according to Federalist 28. As a response to this concern, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 of the Constitution allowed Congress to raise and support armies financially. With this new power of a standing army, Washington was able to swiftly put down the Whiskey Rebellion.
Federalist and anti-federal arguments are still pertinent today. The threats of 9/11 and Pearl Harbor indicate the constant possibility of external perils. Conversely, the pacifist protests during the Vietnam conflict illustrate that many Americans oppose unnecessary militaristic pursuits, despite the president being named commander-in-chief in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Due to the decisive actions of the National Guard during BLM protests, anti-federalist concern over the dangers of a standing army have resurged. The duality of American perspective on the roles of the National Guard and military continue to polarize modern politics, especially given contentions about U.S. intervention overseas.
Therefore, the United States should not only interfere when there is only a direct advantage for the American people. As promised in the Department of State's mission statement, excessive military force risks American lives and diverts resources from government welfare programs. Furthermore, despite good intentions, US military action can and has damaged global stability. For example, in an effort to curb the influence of the USSR in the Congo, the CIA organized a political coup to overthrow Patrice Lumumba, but unfortunately this interference resulted in long-lasting regional instability.
As the United States considers future potential militarization, it's important to reflect on our past victories. But perhaps the commander-in-chief should also take into account international defeats, especially when risking American lives and possibly shattering peace and stability in the long run.
Thank you very much. We now have some questions for you, and let me begin by saying we have a current president who is what my globalist or globalist previous. We had a previous president.
You might have to repeat
was
because you were
America First.
frozen.
Excuse me,
Tom?
I'm sorry. Yes,
you
go ahead,
please
Diane. Go ahead,
No, could
Diane.
could you please repeat because you were frozen?
Yeah, you go ahead, Diane, and I'll go out and come in. Go ahead, please.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yes.
So you mentioned the National Guard. Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
I would contest that the National Guard should be deployed domestically, very similar to what our international relations are supposed to be in terms of preserving American interests. So therefore, I would contest that the National Guard should be deployed when there is a direct and imminent threat to not only the stability and safety of the region, but also to the safety of individual Americans residing in that region.
As a modern application, we can see that in summer 2020, we had the BLM protests where Trump administration decided to deploy the National Guard. And many thought of this as a very contentious issue because of the reason that it might have instigated more violence or resentment. And therefore, the National Guard in that use may have be considered inappropriate, as opposed to what we saw on January 6th of this year, where the National Guard may have been deployed too late.
On the other side of the issue, the National Guard can be an effective tool in order to reinstate peace. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement in Little Rock, Arkansas, President Truman used Executive Order 10730 to take control of the Arkansas state militia and also use the National Guard to restore peace during the Civil Rights Movement.
Let me ask a question which is in the broader context of Unit 6, and that is, there are a number of states that are considering legislation now to make voting more strict, the rules about voting more strict. Why do you suppose we're having that discussion now, and do you think it's a good idea to make those voting laws stricter?
Well, given the context of the last election and all the contention surrounding it, it's no surprise that issues around voting have began to resurge. States such as Florida, Georgia, and Arizona have suggested more strict voting laws, especially speaking to Arizona, even though many state Republicans are divided over this issue.
Yes, elaborating on Mina's issue, I would also argue that the potential of foreign interference in the 2016 election, not only it set the stage for the last 2020 election, in which there was a lot of concern over mail-in ballots. As Mina was stating, I do believe that there is some cause for concern, but even in our own state, John Kavanaugh, a fellow Republican in our state, is questioning some of the policies that his fellow Republicans are proposing and even calling them extreme. In Georgia, it is now illegal to hand someone food or water in long polling lines because it could be considered coercion. Some of these are bordering on not only an infringement of natural rights, but on the ability to safely vote.
Let me ask my question. Our current president is in favor of globalization, and our previous president was in favor of America First foreign policy. Which do you support and why?
I believe that when we look towards specifically the U.S. Department of State's mission statement, which is to represent Americans' foreign policy abroad and to also advance the interest and security of American people, we can see that domestically we should be able to take a priority. So in that scenario, I see that being able to take a taking less of a fourth stage in international relations and taking a more priority on domestic issues should be our first priority.
I acknowledge Shreya's point that prioritizing American citizens should be a very big priority of US foreign policy. However, as a founder of the UN and a would-be founder of the League of Nations had it passed through Congress, the United States, especially after the end of World War II, has a responsibility as a superpower to become involved and mitigate humanitarian crises, not just domestically, but also globally. And their role in stopping the spread of communism, specifically during the Red Scare, was crucial, not only, like as I mentioned, to stop the spread of communism, but also the proliferation of nuclear arms.
Additionally, I would have to agree with Mina and therefore disagree with Shreya. Realistically, it is impossible for the United States to halt all forms of globalization, all forms of foreign interference, simply because some of the countries that we are providing military aid to are solely dependent on us. For example, in Saudi Arabia, their Air Force is their number one tactic right now, and it is 100% reliant on Boeing's planes. Therefore, there is no other country that could fill in that aspect that would still allow their military to be effective in fighting the Houthi rebels.
Thank you.
Your generation seems to have a lower voting participation rate than other generations, older generations. What should or could we do about that?
So I think the most important thing that the United States could do to facilitate voting is taking action to move that right from a negative right to a positive right. Although in the Constitution, the right to vote is protected, it's not facilitated by the United States. And one thing that the United States could do to increase voter turnout and stop voter suppression is regulating the amount of polling stations per population. We see in the last election, specifically in Harris County, Texas, millions of voters, hundreds of thousands of them, were flooding one polling station. If the United States were able to regulate polling stations and make them proportional, specifically in Arizona along the Navajo reservation, it could increase voter turnout specifically for minority groups.
However, addressing your point specifically about youth being able to get involved, I would argue that we are already seeing increased rates of youth participation in voting. However, not only at that level, but at terms of social justice and social progress, our generation has become extremely involved through social media and the media in general. Overall, our society is becoming a lot more fixated on the idea of getting our news through television, through social media apps, etc. I believe, honestly, what our generation's number one problem is going to be is being able to filter through the abundance of news we are receiving and not becoming single issue voters.
So what do you think the role of the US military should be in humanitarian causes?
So as Shreya has already, and Shreya and Mina have touched upon, we are in the UN and therefore we do have some sort of role in order to act through the UN. However, the United States has also taken it upon ourselves to mitigate human rights crises. For example, we did attempt to sanction China for their human rights abuses in Hong Kong. However, at times, those attempts can be detrimental to the marginalized population themselves. Studies have shown that when countries do face economic hardship, as China would have if feeling the full brunt of the proposed sanctions, that the community that was marginalized to start with will actually face an increased level of violence due to the blame game essentially at the state level. And we actually see that the full force of the sanctions would have hurt Hong Kong more because it would not have discriminated between Hong Kong goods and Chinese goods.
Specifically, when we're seeing other military force being used internationally, we can see in the Middle East specifically how excessive military force and presence on the ground has actually led to an increase in US resentment, and has made recruiting for terrorists much easier because of that. A big portion of this is also because of the Obama drone strikes, which happened recently, and shows us in Afghanistan, because of the unnecessary drone strikes, we were able to see an increase in that resentment, and therefore that US military presence should have been decreased. Whereas in other countries, such as Lebanon or Egypt, where US deployment is necessary in order to give financial aid and resources, it should be prioritized.
Summing up my two teammates' arguments, it's so easy for us to criticize US action now because hindsight is always 2020. But I think it's very important when we're considering acting to not only weigh the current issue of what's happening right now, but also take into consideration what is the implication of our action in this area. For example, in an effort to increase U.S. profits, the United States started to intervene in Latin America. And while that did help boost US business, it led to, in the 90s, when the United States suddenly pulled out of Latin America, widespread economic destabilization. And it made the 90s one of the most economically unstable eras in Latin America.
And in our remaining time, I would like to emphasize on Mina's point in Latin America, specifically, speaking of implications, we must also look at the implications of U.S. military locally. For example, a Latin American poet, Darío, wrote a poem to Roosevelt himself, explaining that the military action that he was taking in Latin America was not welcome.
Thank you very much. We now have some comments for you. And Diana, please raise your hand if I freeze again. I apologize for that. Well done. Just a very well-prepared, very knowledgeable presentation. I enjoyed your initial 4-minute presentation, particularly right at the beginning when you tied Washington to Eisenhower. That nice linkage there. And then you talked about United Fruit and Raytheon and so forth, good examples. And you mentioned Homeland Security, and we really haven't had that mentioned very much today, if at all, and that was very well done. And then, of course, you talked about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and anyway, great job. When we ask you the questions, I want to particularly highlight one thing. When you're talking about global stability, and you mentioned Patrice Lumumba, I mean, boy, that's a name from the past. You had differing opinions about that, and you disagreed with one another, but you respectfully disagreed. And we need a lot more of that respectful disagreement in our civil discussions, our public discussions today. Overall, I thought you did a great job. And the other thing is, gosh, you have a tremendous amount of knowledge on and so much information and situations and facts. You're to be commended for doing that. You have really done a great job in research, and you did a great job as it related to presenting to us today. But there is a proviso that goes along with that, and that is, because you have all that wisdom, and because you have all that knowledge, and because you definitely have leadership capabilities, you must continue to do that. It can't end with the We the People program. You must continue in school, in your communities, further education, your careers within your state and within our nation, because we really need to have good citizens like you, so that we can have a better future. Congratulations to you. Thank you very much, and good luck to you.
Good. I agree with what Tom had to say. You did a very effective kind of job. Good, strong in terms of history, a good spread of things. I love that you used the State Department mission statement. That was effective to make your point. You also, when I threw some questions at you that weren't directly from the written question you had, you handled that well, and you gave us some solutions to the problem, rather than just talking about the problem. So I thought you did an excellent job. You've got to remember, you're in kind of a rarefied atmosphere in terms of being in the national finals. You are some of those knowledgeable citizens, as Tom was talking about. And I hope that you will continue to work on those, because if you take a look at American history, most major change has come about because small groups of well-informed people have pushed the issue forward. And so now it's your turn, so go get them.
I'd just like to echo my colleagues. I thought that you did a wonderful job. They've actually raised a lot of the points that I was going to make. I felt that your prepared remarks really well structured, really well done. I love the fact that you have a lot of, you make a statement and then you give some real specific examples. You gave us a lot of opportunity to have good follow-up questions, which you answered really well. I like the way that you found both sides of the founders' arguments to be pertinent today. So as much as we disagreed then, we as a country still disagree now on the role of the military. I really I appreciated the fact that like others have said, that you seem to have a lot of passion in your answers. I really enjoyed that. And sometimes you disagreed, but you did so in a way that was, kind of civil. You could model this for our politicians. I think that would be a nice thing. I also appreciated the fact that you gave some examples from Arizona. So you were able to bring the lessons, to us from your home state. And I also like the fact that throughout your presentation, there was this kind of a sense of a desire for social justice, which you articulated in your question about your answer to the question about what are young people today, kind of focusing on. I think you are becoming more participatory as a generation. And I do see that social justice, kind of element coming to the forefront. So really great job.